Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Horizon and watched the strange object floating in space. His ship had been exploring the outer edges of the Kepler 442 system when they found it. The object was smooth and silver, about the size of a school bus, and it definitely did not belong to humans. Dr. Lisa Hart walked up beside him, holding her tablet with shaking hands. She was the ship's chief science officer and had never seen anything like this before. None of them had. This was humanity's first contact with something made by aliens. The probe started sending signals as soon as the horizon got close. Lieutenant Kate Wilson worked at her communication station, trying to understand what the signals meant. Her screens filled with strange symbols and numbers that made no sense to human eyes. Commander Alex Torres checked their position again. They were far from Earth, almost 2 years of travel even at their fastest speed. If this alien device was dangerous, help would not come quickly. The probe suddenly stopped sending random signals and began broadcasting something different. Kate's equipment picked up what sounded like music, then images, then something that might have been mathematics. The aliens were trying to communicate, on a world many light years away. The Zephyrian Collective received the probe's report. They had sent thousands of these devices across the galaxy to watch for new civilizations. This one had found something interesting near a small yellow star. Ambassador Veltar read the report with mild curiosity. The probe had detected radio signals from the third planet, which meant the creatures there had developed basic technology. The signals showed they had split their world into many small groups that sometimes fought each other. Their technology was primitive, barely capable of reaching their own moon. The collective had seen this pattern many times before. Young civilizations always followed the same path. First, they would develop radio, then nuclear weapons, then basic space travel. After that, they would either destroy themselves or become advanced enough for contact. Veltar marked the species as Category 3 primitive. This meant they were not dangerous and not particularly useful. When the time came, they would be offered client status in the collective. Most species accepted this offer gladly. It meant protection, technology, and a place in galactic civilization. In exchange, they would follow collective laws and contribute resources when asked. Back on the horizon, Dr. Hart had made an important discovery. The alien probe was not just watching them. It was also scanning their ship and recording everything it saw. Every piece of human technology, every signal they sent, every word they spoke was being copied and sent somewhere far away. Captain Morrison called Earth immediately. The message would take months to reach home, but the government needed to know what was happening. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe. President Maria Santos received the message while sitting in the Oval Office. She called an emergency meeting with her advisors, including Secretary of Defense General Paul Adams. They had always known this day might come, but nobody felt ready for it. 3 months later, a much larger alien ship appeared near Earth. It was beautiful and terrifying. At the same time, made of the same silver material as the probe, but 1,000 times bigger. The ship sent a message in perfect English, asking to speak with Earth's leaders. Ambassador Veltar had arrived to make contact. He brought a small fleet of ships and hundreds of other aliens to help with the process. To him, this was routine work. He had made first contact with dozens of species before, and they all ended the same way. The meeting took place at the United Nations building in New York. Veltar walked into the assembly hall wearing robes that seemed to shift color in the light. He was tall and thin, with large eyes and pale blue skin. He looked at the gathered humans with polite indifference. President Santos welcomed him to Earth and offered friendship between their peoples. Veltar smiled, showing teeth that were too sharp and too white. He had heard similar words from countless other species. Veltar explained that humanity had been chosen to join his Zephyrian collective. This was a great honor, he said. The collective controlled most of the galaxy and had brought peace and order to thousands of worlds. Humans would be given technology and protection. In return, they would accept collective authority and contribute to the greater good. The terms were simple. Humanity would become a client species with limited self-government. They could keep their culture and basic freedoms, but all major decisions would require collective approval. Their military would be disbanded, their aggressive tendencies controlled, and their resources shared with more advanced civilizations. Veltar expected immediate acceptance. Every other species had agreed to these terms without question. The benefits were obvious, and resistance was impossible. The collective's technology was thousands of years ahead of anything humans possessed, but President Santos surprised him. She thanked him for the offer and said humanity needed time to consider it. This had never happened before. Veltar found himself confused and slightly annoyed. What was there to consider? He agreed to wait 1 month for an answer, confident that humans would see reason. Meanwhile, he began setting up a permanent embassy on Earth's moon. Soon, he thought, this primitive species would join the countless others who serve the collective faithfully. Dr. Hart watched the alien ships through her telescope and wondered if humanity was making a terrible mistake. The smart choice seemed obvious. Accept the offer, gain incredible technology, and join galactic civilization. But something about Veltar's attitude bothered her. The way he looked at humans reminded her of how humans might look at clever pets. She began studying everything the aliens had shared about their technology. Maybe there was another way forward, one that Veltar had not considered. Maybe humanity had something to offer that the galaxy had never seen before. 3 months had passed since Ambassador Veltar's deadline, and he was growing impatient. No species in collective history had ever needed this much time to accept the obvious benefits of membership. He paced around his lunar embassy, wondering, what could possibly be taking so long? On Earth, humanity had been busy. President Maria Santos had assembled teams of scientists, engineers, and military experts to study everything they could learn about Zephyrian technology. Dr. Lisa Hart led the main research group, working day and night with brilliant minds from every nation. Dr. Ryan Clark, a physicist from MIT, had made the first breakthrough. The alien technology was incredibly advanced, but it followed predictable patterns. Their computers used quantum processors that were faster than anything humans had built, but the basic principles were similar to human designs. Director Steve Chun, an engineer from NASA, discovered something even more interesting. The Zephyrian ships seemed to have no backup systems. Everything was perfectly designed and rarely broke, so they saw no need for redundancy. Human ships, built with the expectation that things would go wrong, actually had some advantages and flexibility. Maya Rodriguez, a computer specialist who had helped design Earth's internet, found the most surprising thing of all: the collectives. Communication systems were incredibly sophisticated but completely centralized. Every decision flowed up to higher authorities, and every command came down from above. There was no room for individual creativity or independent thinking. When the deadline expired, Ambassador Patricia Hayes delivered humanity's response. She had been chosen as Earth's first galactic relations director, and her message shocked the Zephyrian delegation. Instead of accepting client status, humanity proposed a partnership between equals. High Counselor Zindara had replaced Veltar after his failure to secure quick agreement. She read the human proposal with growing disbelief. Humans wanted to trade technology as equals, establish joint research projects, and maintain complete independence. They even suggested that the collective might benefit from human creativity and innovation. The audacity was breathtaking. In 50,000 years of expansion, no primitive species had ever made such demands. The collective's superiority was absolute and unquestionable. These humans clearly did not understand their place in the galactic order. Captain Jake Morrison had been given a new mission during the negotiations. His ship, now upgraded with hybrid human-alien technology, visited several nearby star systems. Officially, these were diplomatic missions to learn about galactic civilization. Unofficially, Morrison was gathering intelligence. He discovered that the collective's empire was not as stable as it appeared. Many client species were unhappy with their status but lacked the courage to complain. The artistic Velani people had been forced to abandon their cultural traditions because the collective found them inefficient. The mathematical Corvex had been assigned to accounting duties instead of being allowed to pursue advanced research. Commander Alex Torres, now serving as Morrison's first officer, met privately with representatives from these species. They spoke carefully, knowing that collective monitors might be listening, but their message was clear. They admired humanity's bold stance and wished they had shown similar courage. The Velani, artist Silrana, created a beautiful sculpture that seemed to show random swirls of color. Only when Torres looked at it from a specific angle could he see the hidden message worked into the design. It showed humans and aliens working together as equals, free from collective control. Dr. Hart's research team made another breakthrough while studying captured collective technology. Engineer Corps leader Colonel Tony Roberts discovered that alien ships could be modified using human techniques. The rigid collective designs actually became more efficient when human flexibility was added to them. These discoveries gave humanity confidence, but they also attracted unwanted attention. High Counselor Zindara decided that humans needed to be taught their proper place in the galactic hierarchy. She ordered a demonstration of collective power. Commander Ithel arrived at Earth with a small fleet of 12 warships. His mission was simple: destroy a few human satellites and space stations to show the consequences of defiance. The humans would quickly beg for mercy and accept client status. But Admiral Rachel Stone had been preparing for this possibility. Earth's orbital defenses had been completely rebuilt using hybrid technology. When Ethel's ships approached the outer defense perimeter, they encountered something unprecedented. The human defensive platforms did not behave like normal military installations. Instead of fixed positions and predictable responses, they moved in complex patterns that seemed almost random. Their weapon systems adapted continuously, changing frequency and power levels to counter collective defensive measures. Lieutenant Kate Wilson, now promoted to commander and serving as Earth's Director of Space Communications, coordinated the defense from a command center buried deep under the Rocky Mountains. Her systems linked every defense platform, every ship, and every sensor into a single responsive network. The battle lasted only 6 hours, but those hours changed everything. Ithel's superior technology could not overcome human tactical creativity. His ships found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to follow expected patterns. Just when his computers calculated the optimal response to human tactics, those tactics would change completely. 2 collective ships were destroyed outright, and 4 others suffered significant damage. Ithel ordered a retreat, sending shocked reports back to the collective leadership. The humans had not just survived the demonstration. They had won. High Counselor Zindara read the battle reports with growing alarm. This was not supposed to be possible. Collective technology was superior in every measurable way. Their weapons were more powerful, their shields stronger, their ships faster. Yet somehow, the humans had prevailed. She convened an emergency session. of the Collective Council. For the first time in millennia, they faced a situation their vast experience had not prepared them for. A primitive species had not only refused to submit, but had actually defeated collective forces in open combat. Some council members suggested offering humanity better terms. Perhaps they could be granted associated status instead of client status, with more autonomy and fewer restrictions. But the hardliners, led by Supreme Admiral Kaintor, demanded immediate and overwhelming retaliation. The decision was unanimous. Humanity would be classified as a rogue species and subjected to full military conquest. Their unusual tactics had won a single battle, but they could not stand against the combined might of the collective fleet. Back on Earth, President Santos received reports from Captain Morrison about growing unrest among collective client species. Dr. Hart's analysis of captured collective technology revealed critical weaknesses in their seemingly invincible systems. Admiral Stone's successful defense had proven that humans could fight and win against superior numbers. The stage was set for a conflict that would determine not just humanity's fate, but the future of galactic civilization itself. The collective was mobilizing for war, confident that their overwhelming superiority would quickly crush human resistance. They had no idea that they were about to face something completely outside their experience, a species that grew stronger when challenged and more creative when threatened. Fleet Admiral Korthak commanded the largest military force the collective had assembled in over 1,000 years. 500 warships stretched across space in perfect formation, their silver hulls gleaming in the light of distant stars. This fleet represented nearly 20% of the collective's total military power, brought together for one purpose: to crush human resistance once and for all. The Admiral studied reports about the strange species that had dared to defy galactic order. Humans were primitive by collective standards, having achieved spaceflight only recently. Their weapons were crude, their ships small and weak. Yet somehow they had defeated Commander Ethel's demonstration force. Korthak attributed this to luck and trickery rather than any real military capability. On Earth, President Maria Santa stood in the Situation Room deep beneath the White House. Around her, the greatest military minds humanity had ever assembled worked frantically to prepare for the coming storm. General Paul Adams coordinated ground defenses while Admiral Rachel Stone managed the space fleet. They all knew the odds were impossible, but surrender was not an option. Protocol defiance had been developed over months of careful planning. Unlike traditional military doctrine, it assumed that humans would always be outnumbered and outgunned. Victory would come not from superior firepower, but from superior thinking. Every human ship, every defense platform, every weapon system was designed to be unpredictable. Commodore Jake Morrison had been given command of Earth's main defense fleet. His flagship, the UES Defiant, was a marvel of human engineering combined with captured collective technology. Captain Ben Turner, his former navigation officer, now commanded the U's Resilient. Together, they led a fleet of 60 ships against an enemy force 8 times larger. Dr. Lisa Hart worked around the clock in her laboratory, analyzing every piece of collective technology they had captured. Her team, including quantum physicist Dr. Lavra Mitchell and computer specialist Nick Foster, had discovered something crucial about alien ship design. The collective built for perfection, not adaptability. Their ships could perform their intended functions flawlessly, but they struggled when forced to operate outside normal parameters. The first battle took place at the Luna Defense Station, humanity's forward base on the Moon. Commander Lisa Park had volunteered to lead the defense, knowing it was likely a suicide mission. Her force of 12 ships faced 60 collective vessels in what should have been a massacre. But Park had studied human history. particularly the tactics used by smaller forces against larger ones throughout the centuries. She did not meet the enemy in formation combat as they expected. Instead, her ship scattered across the lunar surface, using the moon's gravity and terrain to create chaos in the collective ranks. The alien ships found themselves chasing individual human vessels through asteroid fields and around lunar mountains. Every time they thought they had cornered their prey, the humans would disappear behind cover or change direction in ways that seemed impossible. Electronic warfare systems designed by Nick Foster jammed collective communications and fed false information to their targeting computers. Admiral Stone watched the battle from Earth's command center, coordinating the defense through quantum communication links that the collective could not intercept. Her tactical displays showed the chaotic dance taking place around the moon, with human ships darting between much larger alien vessels like wolves attacking a herd of cattle. The breakthrough came when Commander Park's ship, the UES Courage, managed to ram a collective cruiser at full speed. The human ship was destroyed instantly, but the alien vessel's perfect armor could not handle the kinetic impact. As it broke apart, other human ships swarmed over the wreckage, studying and copying alien technology in real time. Engineer Corps. Leader Colonel Tony Roberts led boarding parties onto damaged collective ships, capturing intact alien systems before the vessels could self-destruct. His teams worked with desperate efficiency, knowing that each piece of captured technology could save thousands of human lives in future battles. The collective forces retreated from Luna after losing 8 ships and failing to destroy the human base. Admiral Korthak read the battle reports with growing concern. His forces had achieved their objective, but the cost had been far higher than expected. Worse, human tactics seemed to improve with each engagement. Dr. Hart's analysis of the newly captured technology revealed the key weakness in collective military thinking. Their ships were designed to fight other conventional forces using predictable tactics and formations. When faced with chaos and unpredictability, their sophisticated systems actually became liabilities. Human forces began adapting collective technology in ways its creators had never imagined. Weapons designed for long-range bombardment were modified for close-quarters combat. Defensive systems meant to protect against energy weapons were reconfigured to stop kinetic projectiles. Navigation computers built for precise calculations were reprogrammed to generate random movement patterns. The second major battle occurred near Jupiter, where Commodore Morrison led a desperate defense of the outer system mining stations. This time, the collective sent 200 ships under the direct command of Admiral Korthak himself. The human force numbered only 30 vessels, but they had learned from the Luna engagement. Captain Turner commanded the left wing of the human formation, using Jupiter's radiation fields to mask his ship's movements. The collective sensors, designed for perfect clarity, could not function properly in the chaotic electromagnetic environment around the gas giant. Morrison coordinated a battle plan that would have been impossible for any traditional military force. Human ships operated independently while somehow maintaining perfect coordination. They shared targeting data instantly, adapted to changing conditions in real time, and supported each other without central command control. The alien fleet found itself fighting not 30 individual ships, but a single adaptive organism that responded to threats faster than their computers could calculate solutions. When they concentrated fire on one human vessel, others would immediately move to cover it. When they tried to surround isolated ships, those vessels would suddenly receive support from unexpected directions. Admiral Korthak watched his perfect formations crumble as human forces flowed around them like water. His ships were more powerful individually, but the humans fought as an interconnected whole. Every time his forces gained an advantage, The tactical situation would shift in ways he could not predict. The battle ended when Morrison's ships managed to capture 3 collective vessels intact. The human boarding parties, led by Colonel Roberts, overwhelmed the alien crews through sheer audacity and improvised tactics. For the first time in collective history, their advanced warships were being operated by enemy forces. Back on the collective homeworld, Supreme Admiral Keentor received reports of the Jupiter battle with disbelief. Admiral Korthak, one of their finest commanders, had been forced to retreat after losing 20 ships to an inferior force. The humans were not just resisting conquest. They were winning. High Counselor Zindara convened another emergency session of the Collective Council. The human problem was spiraling out of control. Reports from across the galaxy spoke of unrest among client species, inspired by humanity's unexpected success. Some worlds were even beginning to question collective authority openly. Dr. Hart's research team made another crucial discovery while studying the latest batch of captured ships. Collective military doctrine had not changed significantly in thousands of years. They had become so accustomed to easy victories that they had stopped adapting or improving. Human forces, facing extinction, innovated constantly. The stage was set for an even larger confrontation. The collective was mobilizing additional fleets from across their empire, determined to crush the human rebellion before it could inspire others. But humanity had gained something more valuable than ships or weapons. They had gained confidence. They were no longer fighting just for survival, but for the right to exist as equals in a galaxy that had underestimated them from the beginning. Ambassador Patricia Hayes stood in the shadowy corridors of Kepler Station, a remote trading post on the edge of collective space. Her diplomatic credentials gave her access to areas most humans could never visit, but this meeting had nothing to do with official business. She was here to meet with members of the growing resistance movement that humanity's success had inspired across the galaxy. The Velani artist Silrana arrived first, her elegant form moving gracefully through the station's artificial gravity. Her people had been forced to abandon their traditional art forms because the collective considered them inefficient, but she continued creating in secret. Her latest works depicted scenes of liberation that spoke to oppressed beings throughout the galaxy. Prex, single quotes Ion, the Corvex mathematician, joined them moments later. His species possessed incredible analytical abilities that the collective had reduced to simple accounting work. In hidden meetings like this one, he used his mathematical genius to calculate supply routes for the resistance and predict collective fleet movements with startling accuracy. Hayes had spent months building this network, traveling from system to system under the cover of diplomatic missions. What she found surprised her. The collective's empire looked stable from the outside, but beneath the surface, countless species yearned for the freedom that humanity was fighting to achieve. Colonel Sam Blake led the military side of the resistance network. His special operations teams had established hidden bases in asteroid fields and on rogue planets throughout collective space. These bases served as staging points for joint operations between humans and their alien allies. The first major joint operation targeted a collective supply depot in the Vega system. Blake's Marines worked alongside Velani infiltrators and Corvex, technical specialists, to capture an entire convoy of supply ships. The operation succeeded because each species contributed unique abilities that the collective had never encountered. Working together, Dr. Lisa Hart continued her research on Earth, but now she led a multinational team that included alien scientists working in secret. Dr. Laura Mitchell collaborated with Corvex physicists to develop new shield technologies, while xenobiologist Dr. Gary Webb worked with Velani biochemists to understand how different species could share resources more effectively. Their most important discovery came from studying How various species approached problem solving. Humans excelled at creative adaptation. Vellani possessed incredible artistic insight that revealed hidden patterns. And Corvex could calculate complex scenarios that others missed entirely. When these approaches combined, they created solutions that no single species could achieve alone. Meanwhile, the collective struggled with internal discord for the first time in their long history. Counselor Vexari, a moderate voice on the collective council, began questioning whether their traditional methods were adequate for dealing with the human crisis. Her private report suggested that perhaps the collective could learn something from studying human tactics, but hardliners led by Supreme Admiral Keentor demanded increasingly aggressive responses. They refused to believe that primitive species could pose a real threat to collective supremacy. Every defeat was explained as a fluke or attributed to alien trickery rather than superior strategy. The resistance achieved its first major victory when a combined task force liberated the industrial world of Kepler Prime. The operation had been planned by strategic analyst Major Emma Cooper, working with intelligence gathered by Captain Morrison's reconnaissance missions and calculations provided by Prexion's mathematical models. Commodore Morrison led the space battle while Colonel Blake coordinated ground operations. The collective garrison had never faced an attack by multiple species working in perfect coordination. Human ships provided electronic warfare support while Vellani infiltrators disabled key defense systems and Corvex technicians hacked into the planetary computer networks. The planet's liberation sent shockwaves across the galaxy. For the first time in 50,000 years, a world had been freed from collective control. The local population, members of the Thysis species who had been enslaved for generations, welcomed their liberators with celebrations that lasted for days. More importantly, the liberation proved that the collective could be beaten when faced with coordinated resistance. Within weeks, uprisings began on dozens of worlds as suppressed species found the courage to fight for their freedom. Sil Rana used her artistic networks to spread news of the victory across collective space. Her coded messages, hidden in seemingly innocent cultural exchanges, reached resistance cells on hundreds of worlds. The message was always the same: liberation was possible, and humans were proving it could be done. Dr. Hart's team made another breakthrough while analyzing captured collective administrative records from Kepler Prime. The Empire's strength came from its ability to prevent cooperation between different species. Each client race was kept isolated, told that they were unique in their dissatisfaction, and warned that rebellion was impossible. The truth was very different. Most species in the collective were unhappy with their status, but they had never been allowed to communicate with each other. The resistance network that Hayes was building gave them their first opportunity to coordinate across species lines. Captain Ben Turner, now promoted to Commodore, led a series of raids on collective communication stations. These attacks, supported by Corvex electronic warfare specialists, disrupted the Empire's ability to maintain centralized control over distant worlds. The collective found themselves facing a crisis they had never imagined. Not only were humans continuing to resist despite overwhelming odds, but their example was inspiring rebellion throughout the Empire. Client species that had been loyal for millennia were suddenly questioning collective authority. Admiral Korthak received orders to increase the pace of his campaign against humanity, but his forces were being drawn away to deal with uprisings in other sectors. The collective military, designed to fight external enemies, struggled to handle simultaneous internal rebellions across dozens of star systems. On Earth, President Santos met with her War Council to assess the changing situation. Reports from Hayes and Morrison painted a picture of an empire in crisis. But they also warned that the collective's response would be increasingly desperate and violent. Dr. Hart presented her latest analysis of collective psychology. The Empire's leaders had built their entire identity around the belief that they were naturally superior to all other species. Admitting that humans and other races could be their equals would require them to abandon everything they believed about themselves and their place in the universe. The resistance network continued to grow, with new species joining the liberation movement each week. The artistic Vellani provided cultural inspiration. The mathematical Corvex offered strategic planning. The industrial Thizes contributed manufacturing capability, and humans supplied the tactical innovation that tied everything together. Colonel Blake established training camps on liberated worlds where resistance fighters from different species learned to work together. These mixed units proved devastatingly effective against collective forces, who had no experience fighting coordinated multi-species tactics. The Liberation Front, as the Resistance had begun calling itself, now controlled nearly 50 star systems. Each liberated world became a beacon of hope for oppressed beings throughout the galaxy and a source of resources for further operations, but the collective was not finished. Supreme Admiral Keentar was assembling the largest military force in galactic history, determined to crush the rebellion before it could spread any further. The final confrontation was approaching, and both sides knew that the outcome would determine the future of civilization itself. Hayes sent a coded message to Earth from her secret base on the liberated world of Nova Pacifica. The Resistance was ready for whatever came next, united by a shared dream of freedom that the collective had tried for millennia to suppress. The galaxy had underestimated humanity's ability to inspire others, and that mistake was about to cost the Empire everything. Supreme Admiral Keentar stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, surveying the greatest military force the galaxy had ever seen. 2,000 collective warships stretched across space in perfect formation, representing nearly half of the Empire's total fleet strength. This was not just a military operation. It was a statement of absolute power designed to crush the rebellion once and for all. The Nexus Fleet, as it had been designated, included vessels from every corner of collective space. Ancient dreadnoughts that had conquered civilizations for millennia flew alongside the newest battleships equipped with experimental weapons. The Admiral had spent months assembling this force, drawing ships away from every sector of the Empire. On Earth, Dr. Lisa Hart worked frantically in her laboratory with computer scientist Dr. Joey Peterson and AI specialist Dr. Nancy Kim. They had developed something unprecedented, a networked intelligence system that could coordinate hundreds of ships across multiple star systems in real time. The technology borrowed concepts from Earth's Internet, scaled up to handle the complexity of galactic warfare. The system, codenamed Unity, represented humanity's greatest technological achievement. Unlike collective command structures that required orders to flow up and down rigid hierarchies, Unity allowed every ship in the network to share information instantly and adapt to changing conditions without waiting for central approval. Admiral Rachel Stone had been given command of the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. 800 ships from 12 different species gathered in the Centauri Nebula, their crews united by a shared determination to defend their newfound freedom. The odds were still overwhelming, but the Liberation Front had learned to use disadvantages as advantages. Captain Ben Turner served as Stone's tactical coordinator, implementing strategies that treated the entire battlefield as a single living organism. Human ships would phase in and out of combat zones based on real-time tactical analysis, while Vellani vessels used their artistic intuition to predict enemy movements, and Corvex ships provided mathematical precision to coordinate complex maneuvers. Decisive battle began when Kintara's massive fleet entered the nebula, expecting to find the rebel forces hiding among the gas clouds and stellar debris. What they found instead was something completely outside their experience, a battle formation that seemed to have no formation at all: liberation. Front ships moved through the nebula in patterns that appeared chaotic, but were actually perfectly coordinated. Every vessel knew the position and status of every other vessel in real time, allowing them to respond to threats and opportunities faster than collective commanders could issue orders. Commodore Jake Morrison, now commanding a mixed squadron of human and alien ships, led the opening attack. His forces struck at the edges of the collective formation, then vanished back into the nebula before the enemy could respond effectively. By the time collective ships moved to counter the attack, Morrison's squadron was already hitting them from a completely different direction. Dr. Roberts and his engineering teams had spent months preparing for this battle. They had developed new weapons that combined human creativity with alien technology, creating systems that could adapt their function in real time based on battlefield conditions. Energy weapons became kinetic projectiles, defensive shields became offensive barriers, and communication arrays became electronic warfare systems. The breakthrough came when Dr. Peterson's team successfully penetrated the collective's command network. For 50,000 years, the Empire had relied on centralized control systems that were considered impregnable. But they had never faced hackers who understood network architecture based on principles of distributed intelligence rather than hierarchical command. The hack began subtly with false sensor readings that caused minor confusion in collective formations. As the battle progressed, the interference became more aggressive. Ships began receiving contradictory orders, navigation systems started providing incorrect coordinates, and weapon targeting computers lost lock on their intended targets. Supreme Admiral Kintar watched in growing horror as his perfect formations began to dissolve into chaos. Ships that should have been supporting each other found themselves firing on friendly vessels. Orders that should have reached their destinations in seconds were being delayed or corrupted entirely. The Unity system allowed Liberation Front forces to exploit every moment of collective confusion. When enemy ships lost formation, Allied vessels immediately moved to exploit the gaps. When collective commanders tried to regain control, their communications were jammed by coordinated electronic warfare attacks. Admiral Stone coordinated the battle from her flagship, the FWS Liberation, using displays that showed the tactical situation across light minutes of space with real-time accuracy. Her command decisions were implemented instantly by hundreds of ships operating as extensions of her will. Yet each vessel retained the autonomy to adapt to local conditions. The turning point came when a combined squadron, led by Captain Morrison and Velani Commander Silrana, managed to break through the collective's main battle line. Their ships, moving in perfect coordination despite representing three different species with completely different fighting styles, carved through the enemy formation like a sword through silk. Behind them came waves of Liberation Front vessels, each one exploiting the breakthrough in ways the collective could not predict or counter. Human ships used kinetic ramming attacks. Velani vessels employed energy weapons in artistic patterns that confused enemy targeting systems, and Korvek ships calculated precise firing solutions that maximized damage while minimizing exposure. Supreme Admiral Kintar found himself commanding a fleet that was tearing itself apart. His ships were more advanced individually than anything the rebels possessed, but they could not function effectively when their coordination systems were compromised. The collective's greatest strength had become their greatest weakness. Final blow came when Dr. Roberts' boarding teams, supported by Velani infiltrators and Korvek's technical specialists, managed to capture the Eternal Dominion itself. The flagship's fall sent shockwaves through the remaining collective forces. many of whom had never seen their Supreme Commander's vessel damaged, let alone captured. Keenter stood on his bridge as human marines poured through the corridors of his ship, accompanied by beings from species he had considered inferior for his entire life. For the first time in 50,000 years, a collective fleet had been decisively defeated in open battle. The aftermath was swift and devastating. Word of the Nexus fleet's destruction spread across the galaxy faster than the collective could suppress it. Uprisings that had been simmering on hundreds of worlds exploded into open rebellion as suppressed species realized that the Empire's military might was not invincible after all. On Earth, President Santos received reports of collective worlds surrendering without a fight, their populations welcoming Liberation Front forces as heroes rather than conquerors. The empire that had dominated the galaxy for millennia was collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. Ambassador Hayes, now serving as the Liberation Front's chief negotiator, received an unprecedented message from the collective capital. For the first time in their history, the Empire's leaders were requesting peace negotiations. The galaxy had finally learned not to underestimate humanity, but the lesson had come at the cost of everything the collective had built. The Great War was over, but the work of building something better was just beginning. 6 months after the destruction of the Nexus fleet, representatives from over 200 species gathered on Earth for the most important political event in galactic history. The Galactic Liberation Conference brought together beings who had never been allowed to speak as equals, united by a shared dream of freedom that humanity had helped make possible. President Maria Santos stood at the podium in the newly constructed Unity Hall, looking out at delegates whose ancestors had been enemies or strangers for thousands of years. Beside her sat former collective counselor Vexari, who had emerged as a key ally in the effort to transform galactic civilization from the ground up. The fall of the collective had not been violent or chaotic as many had feared. Instead, it had been remarkably peaceful, with most worlds choosing to join the growing liberation movement rather than fight a hopeless battle. The Empire's rigid structure, once its greatest strength, had become a fatal weakness when its central authority collapsed. Ambassador Patricia Hayes had been chosen as the first Secretary General of the Galactic Federation of Free Worlds, the new organization that was rising from the ashes of the old empire. Unlike the hierarchical collective, the Federation operated on principles that seemed revolutionary but were actually quite simple: equality, cooperation, and respect for differences. The conference delegates spent weeks debating the structure of their new government. Humans contributed ideas about democratic representation and individual rights, while other species offered their own insights about consensus building, resource sharing, and conflict resolution. The result was something unprecedented in galactic history: a truly inclusive civilization. Dr. Lisa Hart had been appointed to lead the Federation Science Council, coordinating research projects that combine the knowledge and capabilities of hundreds of species. Her first major initiative involved terraforming projects guided by Dr. Lavra Mitchell's physics research and ecological restoration efforts led by xenobiologist Dr. Gary Webb. The scale of cooperation was breathtaking. Vellani artists worked with human engineers to design living cities that grew rather than being built. Corvex mathematicians collaborated with human computer scientists to create new forms of artificial intelligence that enhanced rather than replaced biological thinking. Former collective species contributed technologies they had been forbidden to share for millennia. Admiral Rachel Stone commanded the Federation's new exploration service, dedicated to making peaceful contact with civilizations beyond the former collective's borders. Her mixed-species crews represented everything the old empire had tried to prevent: beings from different worlds working together as equals, learning from each other's strengths. The transformation extended beyond politics and technology to touch the daily lives of beings across the galaxy. On the liberated world of Kepler Prime, former slaves from the Thysis species worked alongside their former overseers to rebuild their society based on principles of mutual respect rather than domination. Colonel Sam Blake, now serving as Earth's Director of Interspecies Education, oversaw the establishment of schools where young beings from dozens of different species learned together. These institutions represented hope for a future where cooperation would be natural rather than revolutionary. The former collective territories were integrated into the Federation through negotiation rather than conquest. Species that had been client races for thousands of years suddenly found themselves asked what they wanted rather than being told what they would receive. Many needed time to adjust to the concept of self-determination after so many generations of dependence. Captain Ben Turner, now Admiral Turner, led the Federation Navy's peacekeeping forces. His ships patrolled former collective space not as conquerors but as protectors, helping to maintain stability while new governments found their footing. The irony was not lost on anyone that former rebels were now helping to preserve order. Dr. Roberts continued his engineering work, but now he led teams that included the galaxy's brightest minds, working together on projects that would have been impossible under collective rule. They developed new transportation systems that could move goods and people between star systems in days rather than months, and communication networks that allowed real-time conversation across galactic distances. The most significant changes were cultural rather than technological. For the first time in 50,000 years, different species were free to interact as equals, share their knowledge openly, and learn from each other without fear of punishment. Art, music, literature, and philosophy flourished as beings discovered what they could create together. Silrana sculptures now decorated public spaces throughout Federation space, her artistic vision inspiring others to see beauty in diversity rather than uniformity. Her latest work, displayed in Unity Hall, showed representatives from hundreds of species reaching toward a shared star, each contributing their unique qualities to a greater whole. Prexion had established the Federation Institute for Advanced Mathematics, where Corvex researchers worked with human scientists and scholars from other species to tackle problems that had seemed impossible for millennia. Their first breakthrough involved new forms of faster-than-light travel that would make the galaxy feel smaller and more connected. The former collective homeworld had been renamed Harmony, symbolizing the transformation from dominance to cooperation. The planet's new government included representatives from every species that had lived there, working together to heal the wounds left by thousands of years of oppression. 5 years after the conference, Ambassador Hayes stood once again before the Federation Assembly, this time to deliver the annual State of the Galaxy address. The transformation had exceeded everyone's most optimistic expectations. Trade between species had increased dramatically. Scientific discoveries were being made at an unprecedented rate, and conflicts were being resolved through negotiation rather than force. The speech took place on the anniversary of First Contact, when Ambassador Veltar had arrived at Earth expecting to find just another primitive species ready to accept client status. Hayes reflected on how that moment of underestimation had led to the liberation of countless worlds and the dawn of a new age of galactic civilization. Outside Unity Hall, children from dozens of different species played together in Earth's first interspecies school. Human children learned mathematics from young Corvex, while Velani youth taught art to beings whose species had never been allowed to express creativity. Former Marine Sam Blake watched over them, marveling at how natural cooperation seemed to these young beings who had never known a galaxy divided by artificial barriers. The final image that would be remembered from that day showed something that would have been impossible under collective rule: a classroom where beings from across the galaxy learned together, their differences celebrated rather than suppressed, their potential unlimited by the prejudices of previous generations. It was a future that had seemed impossible when the galaxy first underestimated humanity, but which had become reality because humans had refused to accept the limitations others tried to impose on them. The galaxy had learned its lesson about underestimating species based on their apparent weaknesses. More importantly, it had discovered that true strength came not from dominance but from unity, not from suppression but from celebration of diversity, and not from fear but from the courage to imagine something better than what had existed before. Humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy had not been their technology or their military tactics, but their unwavering belief that all beings deserve the chance to reach their full potential as equals among the stars.